Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today I am joined once again by Scott M. Greer. So today I will be going on a lot of solo monologues and talking to myself. So hopefully the fans enjoy that. We've got a lot of topics to talk about today, but first up we want to talk, it's not looking too good for Donald Trump right now in the presidential election. Last Friday, the Supreme Court rejected Texas's lawsuit to challenge the election results in several battleground states. And on Monday, the Electoral College voted in Joe Biden. Worst of all, Republican senators led by Mitch McConnell are urging Trump to not challenge this and are urging their fellow Republicans to just accept the results and acknowledge that Joe Biden is president-elect. So the first thing to really talk about is the Supreme Court's betrayal. Trump has appointed 3 Supreme Court justices. All 3 of them voted to ignore and reject Texas's lawsuit, to not even hear it out loud. The only 2 justices who wanted to hear it were Alito and Thomas, both who were appointed by George H.W. Bush. Or actually, Clarence Thomas was appointed by George H.W. Bush. Alito was appointed by George W. Bush. So this is like who's defending Trump, not his own appointees, and certainly not John Roberts. And we've been hearing all the time about how great these Supreme Court justices are and how this is really going to lead to a change in the nation, how they're going to stand up for America First principles and Trumpism and conservatism, and they're going to reverse all these liberal changes we've seen about. And, you know, frankly, all these justices have proved to be disappointments. Even Amy Coney Barrett, who's only been on the bench for a few weeks, every one of them has proved a disappointment. Gorsuch, you know, we heard about how he was going to be the greatest thing ever when he was appointed, going to be the next Antonin Scalia. You know, this was going to be him. And then when he got up on the court, all he's done is sided with illegal immigrants, looked into the civil rights law and found exemptions and protections for transgender people and gays, and looked respectable and all about conservative principles while sitting on the high court. Kavanaugh has been better, except when it comes to these election lawsuits. You know, when he was right before the election, he had this lawsuit coming before him about Pennsylvania, about allowing all these ballots to be counted. He ruled in favor of Pennsylvania counting all these dubious ballots. And now he's rejecting Texas's lawsuit. He's been much better on immigration. There is a case where he ruled there was a murderer down in Mississippi who's black, and he claimed that the prosecutor was racist and there weren't, because he didn't allow any black jurors to be on the case, but it was like an open and shut case, like this guy was clearly guilty. And Kavanaugh found that the prosecutor was acting racist and this man deserved a new trial with a more diverse jury. So that's one disappointment with Kavanaugh besides what he's done on the election. And of course, Amy Coney Barrett, she's only been on the court for a few weeks. And in the meantime, she's accumulated quite the record. You know, we have her siding with the liberal justices in the Texas lawsuit. There's she's hearing the citizenship case where the Trump administration wants to ask on the census whether you are a citizen or not, and this will allow them to exclude illegal immigrants. And she's siding with the illegal immigrants so far in the deliberations. She has not ruled on this, or the court has not ruled on this. But in her questions she's asked and the statements she's made so far in the hearings, she has seemed pretty sympathetic more with the illegal immigrants than with the citizens, and then with the Trump administration. And it's not likely that she even voted for Trump. You know, there's clips of her from 2016, ironically saying that we can't really, trust Trump to appoint conservative judges. That he says he is, but we're not sure he's going to do that. And that's all he's done. But all these conservative judges haven't cared about the goodwill, haven't even cared that he's appointed them to their seats that will carry all this prestige and respect that they will have for the rest of their lives. They don't care. They still stick by these principles. You know, Trump has done so much for them, but they don't really care about it. And that's the nature of how Trump has built his movement. He's worked with all these cucks and these establishmentarians, and he thinks that they're his friends, but when, the important moment comes, they always stab him in the back. The last point I want to make on Amy Coney Barrett and really the Supreme Court in general before moving on is that The most important thing to note about her is that the influence her adopted Haitian kids have on her, and she said this in her Senate confirmation hearing, is that when George Floyd died, she wept over this with her Haitian daughter. And that clearly has an influence on her judicial rulings and such. If there's a case that may cause severe emotional distress to her adopted Haitian kids, she's less likely to rule in a conservative manner and in a way that would offend them. And you have to think is that the more these kids age, the more they're going to embrace Black Lives Matter, the more they're going to embrace several other liberal causes, and the rest of the kids, her natural kids, are going to accept those because they want to have a big happy family, and the parents may grow interest in this. So one of the traits that like people always talked about how Amy Coney Barrett was awesome is that she's a mom to 7 kids, and that's great. But when it comes to Supreme Court justice, like if you want to keep your kids happy, I mean, there's all these things that come into that regard. It's like she may be less inclined to rule on things because it's going to upset her own family life. And to think that these people, once they put on a robe, all their family background goes away, all of their personal interests go away, and they just look at the facts is silly. Like nobody does that. Like family and personal life strongly impacts these judges. I've heard from sources that Gorsuch attends an Episcopal church, very liberal Episcopal church, with a lesbian pastor, which that may explain why he ruled in favor of LGBT protections in the Civil Rights Act, which that was not what the act intended back then. And that these type of things, the personal connections, their family background, these weigh on the judges. To think that they're just going to be objective is silly. The Supreme Court is indicative of a larger pitch about Trump and his relationship with the conservative movement. Mitch McConnell, Cocaine Mitch, has always emphasized, and his supporters have, that we're reshaping the judiciary. Like, check out all these judges, and Trump himself touts this. And there's certainly a benefit to having these conservative judges in the federal courts. I mean, it gives a better shot for gun rights when they come up for discussion. It gives a better, chance for immigration, several other matters, and they're certainly better than Democratic judges. But these people aren't necessarily going to be huge Trump supporters or fight for our causes. And they're recommended by Federalist Society. And Federalist Society primarily assesses candidates not based on immigration or how they view affirmative action or birthright citizenship. Actually, a lot of the people that are assessed and positively praised think that birthright citizenship should stay around forever. So you really don't know what you're getting through these judges, except that they're going to defend business interests and these small government initiatives that conservatives always love. They'll defend these silly conservative principles, and they'll ignore some of the bigger questions that a lot of these judges are assessed in terms of what issues they're assessed for. And that's a failure of the Federalist Society. They're not asking these candidates like, hey, what do you think about affirmative action? What do you think about birthright citizenship? What do you think about immigration policy? These should be the things they're asking them about, because we're going to see a lot of these cases come before the Supreme Court in the next 4 years. So why are these questions not being asked, and why is this not more important to the conservatives who assign these judges to Trump and the Republican Party and say these people are great, but we don't really know what we're getting? And some of the people who've been on Trump's shortlist for the Supreme Court have been horrible on immigration, like Raymond Kethledge, who was nearly picked instead of Brett Kavanaugh. Horrible record on immigration, continually sided with illegal immigrants against the government and protected them from deportation. Thomas Hardiman, who was a shortlister during both in 2018 and 2017, was also equally terrible. So these are the people that are being assessed, and we can't necessarily say that all these judges are going to be awesome. And we've seen this with Trump's legal challenges, that at least seven of the judges who rejected Trump's legal case in the various lawsuits that were filed, many challenges that they had, at least 7 of them were Trump appointees, and that includes the 3 Supreme Court justices. So this isn't necessarily people who are going to fight the system. They're going to join the system. They're going to be there to get along. This is how they're going to operate, and it's not necessarily in our interest that these people are there. I mean, it's better than the alternative, But it's not the greatest thing in the world, and it's not a sign that we're taking our country back, because many of these people are going to be compromised and rule in a way that'll continue to make them look respectable. So on issues that relate to race, identity, immigration, especially LG gay stuff, and gender, these people are going to rule in a much more liberal fashion. And the chief salesman of this idea that the conservative judges are going to take back our country and everything's going to be grand if they get appointed is Mitch McConnell. And now we're seeing Mitch McConnell's duplicity. And a lot of listeners probably don't know this, but McConnell has as much influence over Trump, or nearly as much influence as Jared Kushner. In fact, he's probably the second most influential person in Trump's ear. Trump has always followed his dictates. Trump wanted to pull troops completely out of the Middle East. McConnell convinced him to keep, a small number there, to not have a full withdrawal. And he was livid that he even suggested a full withdrawal, or withdrawal the half of the number that he pulled out anyway. McConnell didn't want that at all. McConnell convinced Trump to pick Amy Coney Barrett. He said, this is the only option. There's nothing else. We need a female Supreme Court justice that's a conservative. Here's our pick. Take her. And Trump's like, oh, sure, I'll take this woman. I'm not going to look at the fact that she likely didn't vote for me in 2016. I even wonder if maybe Coney Barrett voted for Trump in 2020. But that's another concern. She probably did. And Mitch McConnell was the person who put her on the Supreme Court. There was much better candidates. There was Bridget Beatty. If he wanted to pick a woman, Bridget Beatty of Arizona was a committed immigration patriot. You knew where she stood on the issue. She got confirmed with an overwhelmingly bipartisan coalition when she was up for nomination to the federal courts, that is, not to the Supreme Court, obviously. So this was somebody who was much better, and she got, she had the full support that she would have needed to sail through Senate confirmation. She may have not had the charisma or the dynamism of Amy Coney Barrett, and certainly not the conservative fetishism that is inspired by Amy Coney Barrett. But we would have been guaranteed that this is somebody who would have supported Trump and would have supported his principles on the Supreme Court rather than Amy Coney Barrett. And even I've heard that Bridget Beatty was an early Trump supporter. She supported him in the primaries, which is very, very rare among people involved in the conservative legal movement. McConnell also set Trump's legislative agenda. If you look at it, the things that Trump promised in the 2016 campaign trail and what he didn't deliver, such as an infrastructure plan, more centrist policies, even he didn't necessarily propose this on the 2016 campaign trail, but this was in keeping with his 2016 message. There was the RAISE Act, which would have significantly reduced legal immigration. That's something that Trump could have pushed through the legislative process. It wouldn't have likely passed, but, it was a debate worth having. Or even something like, birthright citizenship, putting out a bill to eliminate that. All these things didn't come to the fore because of Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan when Paul Ryan was Speaker of the House. So much of the blame for Trump's errors and misdeeds and disappointments lie with Mitch McConnell. Not necessarily, it is Trump's fault for relying on him so much, but unfortunately he didn't have too many of strong Trumpist supporters within Congress that he could have leaned on and talked to. He was also talking to Lindsey Graham and people who are even worse than Mitch McConnell. This is just how bad it was in terms of Republican senators. So now we see Mitch McConnell, who is trying to subtly push Trump out of the way with what he's doing on the Electoral College matter and the election. He's very gently saying, the Electoral College has spoken. Biden is president-elect. It's time to move on. And he's telling his caucus, we're not going to put up any challenge to the Electoral College because then we'll have to vote it down and we'll look anti-Trump, which would actually be good because they are anti-Trump. Mitch McConnell is the opposite of Trump. He doesn't represent his true principles. And he's always been a very weird individual. You have to look at this. He was a white Southerner in the early 60s, siding with Martin Luther King and going to the Washington, D.C. march. 1963. For white Southerners, that's a very weird factor. And a lot of these, brief digression, is a lot of these Southerners, Republicans, were weirdos who joined the party because they didn't really like all the popular kids being in the Democratic Party. Stuart Stevens, who's this horrible campaign manager, he worked on Mitt Romney's campaign. He said the reason why he joined the Republican Party is because all the old boys, good old boys, were in the Democrats. So it was a way of them, thumbing their nose at the establishment and saying, we're going to do something else. Not necessarily all Southerners who migrated to the Republican Party were like this, but a lot of them who emerged into leadership, most of the boomers and the later silent generation types were like this. They were like Mitch McConnell, like Newt Gingrich, and they don't necessarily, represent the old traditions of the South. So with that digression, this is the type of person he is. He was somebody who made his first political stance about going against his own people, and I think that's something that should be kept in mind throughout his history. I mean, it's a good... Conservative Inc. certainly loves his backstory of marching with Martin Luther King and fighting for civil rights, but it really just shows him waging war against his fellow white Southerners. McConnell's statement about the Electoral College is a not so subtle signal that the Republican Party needs to move on from Trump. That's what it is. That's the simple fact of the matter. There's no other explanation for this. And anyone who wants to say, well, he's just facing up to the truth, he's looking at reality, he has to do this. No. He is clearly saying, Trump, it's time for you to go. We're moving on. We're resetting back to the old 2014 status quo. Bye-bye. Thanks for the judges, but we're not going to help you out in any regard. And we're going to disregard your ideology, your campaign agenda, and your priorities and your legacy. And so we can move back to business as usual. Get back to business first republicanism. We don't care about America first anymore. Bye-bye. That's what he wants to do. And Trump, yet it's remains to be seen what Trump wants to do. I mean, Trump still likes Mitch McConnell. He still listens to him. But maybe this is good that Mitch McConnell coming out and saying this, because he can finally realize that all these people are snakes, that these people were never his friends. They were always enemies. And he can, moving forward, he can wage a serious campaign against them. He can say that the establishment betrayed me. I want to remake the party genuinely in my image. I'm going to support America First candidates. I'm no longer to, kowtow to Mitch McConnell and the establishment's priorities. I care about my own priorities and that of my base. And his base is with him 100%. They depend on Trump to continue to win these elections and to continue to have a turnout among the base. I mean, that was made very clear at the Georgia rally when the crowd drowned out David Perdue when he was trying to speak. He's like, guys, let me speak. And they're like, fight for Trump. And clearly David Perdue didn't get that message, which we'll get to in a moment. But the party establishment wants its great reset, and Trump needs to do everything possible to ensure they don't have it. And I think this dispute over the Electoral College is that Trump wants the party to fight. He's already chided McConnell on Twitter and other Republicans who are wanting to cave in. If they, have that vote in January 6th and there is no opposition towards it and the party leadership shuts it down, it will show that they do not care about Trump. They do not care about his base. And that will send a loud and clear message to Trump that these people are not his allies. They're his enemies. So I actually almost support them doing this, because I don't see the chances of them challenging the election through Congress. I don't think that's going to work. I mean, they don't control the House. The state legislatures aren't really sending the alternative electors. The alternative electors are just selected by the state party. They're not really in dispute. They're not recognized by anybody. The Congress has to recognize them. There's so many challenges with doing that. I think it's almost better for the party leadership to, actively say, we're not going to do this, and to actively vote it down and show their true anti-Trump colors. And this may finally convince Trump to commit himself to building a party that is genuinely America First, genuinely nationalist, and is genuinely in the image he set forth in the 2016 campaign. Now we're back to highly respected's favorite topic of the past month, the Georgia runoffs. I've gone over this case several times ad nauseum. I don't want to bore the listeners with rehashing the same arguments, but there's a few new things to discuss on this matter. One, as I was just saying earlier, The crowd at Trump's rally in Georgia demanded that David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler fight for Trump. Well, they're clearly not doing that. Last week, they announced that they're supporting the defense bill that Trump vigorously opposed because it was going to strip our military bases and our national cemeteries of any honors for Confederate heroes. And it did nothing to combat text censorship. Originally in this bill, it was supposed to eliminate Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which grants these tech platforms publisher immunities, which allows them to operate in the way that they do. And taking that away would have put a serious dent into tech censorship. But Republicans took it out because it wouldn't pass the bill. It was too important. This defense bill was too important. And that's what David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler say. They're like, we disagree with the renaming of the military bases, but we're just not going to do anything. It'll be a local matter. It's not a local matter. The military is a national matter. You can't just say that the state or the locality is going to determine what the base is named after. No, it's up to the military, which is controlled by the federal government. So all these silly reasons aside, this is what Perdue and Loeffler did. They're not showing their support, their true support for Trump, and they're, once again showing they care more about Mitch McConnell's agenda than Donald Trump's. So, really, should you hold the line for them? Because they're not holding the line for you, as they continue to demonstrate time and time again in these past few weeks. We keep hearing these arguments that we have to continue to hold the Senate, because otherwise doom is going to be upon us. The apocalypse is going to occur if we lose the Senate majority. And the Republicans keep betraying Trump and keep betraying his base with actions like we saw with the defense bill. I want to talk about one aspect in these arguments about the Senate and why the GOP supposedly needs to keep the majority. And this was brought up in a civil debate I had with Ryan Gerdusky on Twitter this week. Ryan argues that we need to make sure that Perdue and Loeffler win to stop Amnesty. I say that, I'm not quite sure about that reasoning. I understand this. This is like a legitimate concern. I've said before that the chances for amnesty are even lower if the GOP continues to have the Senate majority. Chuck Grassley is going to be chair of the Immigration Committee. He's pretty good on immigration, even though he said some things about DACA and the Dreamers that are really questionable. But on terms of the grand amnesty, like the Gang of Eight amnesty, or what was proposed in 2006 and 2007, that's not likely to make it through his committee. And, Democrats are going to realize that there's no chance for it, and Biden's going to move away from it. So I would put it amnesty chances if Republicans have the Senate majority at 5%. If they lose the Senate majority and there's a 1 vote difference, I put it at 20%. You may say, what? They'll have that 1 vote. Of course they're going to win. And they'll get traitors like Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and even Mitt Romney on their side. I don't necessarily know if that's the case, and it's a much different scenario than in 2013. The far left just wants a simple amnesty that gives at least 11 million illegal immigrants pathway to citizenship. They don't pay any back taxes. There's no security mechanisms enforced. They just get their amnesty. Done. That's it. That's all that's offered to Republicans. There's nothing on the table for Republicans. The type of bill and deal that they worked out in 2013 is not likely with increased border enforcement and even a symbolic value of beefing up a border wall. Not likely to happen under Joe Biden and the Democrats in 2021. Those are the problems on the left. On the right, the conditions are much more favorable for us than they were in 2013. There's not this groundswell of demand that we need amnesty in order for the Republican Party to survive. Is that this is the only way we can win over Hispanics. Clearly, Trump disproved that in the 2020 election. There are not these major figures like Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly coming out and saying the Republican Party needs to pass amnesty to survive. Pretty much no one is saying that this time around. And there's not that. And also, Republicans are very nervous about upcoming primaries. And there's people like James Lankford in Oklahoma who's terrible on this issue. Lisa Murkowski who's terrible on this issue, who's up for re-election in 2022. There's many others. All these Republicans are going to be very nervous about the amnesty issue and know that primary challengers will use this against them if they vote for it. And they're smart enough to not vote for this, that they know that their political future is in jeopardy if they go with amnesty. Especially when Trump's not going to be, he's not going to disappear if he leaves office. He is going to make amnesty an issue and see this as a legacy issue. And he is going to be ripping into Republicans who are considering it, demanding that they do not push this idea, because if they pass amnesty, this is going to be a repudiation of his immigration legacy. And he wants to use this issue, and he will likely use this issue as a way to exert his leadership over the party. And the Republican base is still with him. So if Trump comes out against it, strongly against it, these Republicans are going to realize that their political futures are, are not going to survive if they vote for amnesty. So that's one difference. And I even see people like Mitt Romney. Like, Mitt Romney, of course, is treacherous in many ways, especially towards Donald Trump. But he wants to run for president in 2024. And all these guys are going to, like, even Marco Rubio, who helped craft the Gang of Eight amnesty in 2013, they're going to realize that amnesty is going to be a negative for them in the 2024 race. They're not going to support it. And Mitt Romney is smart enough. Mitt Romney is surprisingly decent on immigration. He's not going to support an amnesty, in my opinion. And especially with his hopes of running for president again, he knows that this will ensure his chances are pretty much over. So I'm very optimistic about that. Of course, there is a greater chance if Republicans don't have the majority, if a Democrat is chairing the immigration committee and they can push a terrible bill out of committee. Yes, these possibilities all exist. But I think it's still not more than 50%. What's most likely is a DACA amnesty. And the GOP Senate majority is going to pass that regardless. I mean, that is pretty much, the chances for that are about the same whether the GOP controls the Senate or not. That's another story. We could get into that, much later time when they're going to bring it up. We're probably going to see this very soon in January, so Highly Respectable will certainly cover it at that time. But on the grand amnesty that Ryan Gerdusky was talking about, I don't really see the chances for that. And I really think that the most important thing about the Senate runoffs is less that we have to worry about these individual legislative things that could happen under Biden, and a GOP Senate majority could potentially stop. And I've said this before, if looking at this just simply as a legislative matter, it is better that the GOP retains that Senate majority. But at the same time, if they win, it shows that to the Republican leadership that they can ditch Trump, they can ditch nationalism, and they can still retain Trump's base and carry on these elections with a business first message. And we can ignore Trump. We don't need his base. The base will vote for whatever we say we're for. And if they lose those runoffs, it sends a message to them that they have to fight for the base's interests. They cannot sell them out. They cannot betray them. They have to fight for them. And if they do betray them, they can't win in these states. They will not win in Georgia. They will not win in Texas. They will not win in Florida. They will not win in Ohio. This message needs to be delivered to them. And I think the only way that they can hear this message, because right now, Mitch McConnell and the leaders want their reset. They want to return back to business as usual and make deals with Joe Biden. But if they lose those Georgia Senate runoffs, they can't return back to business as usual, and they have to maintain themselves as an opposition party to the Democrats. And they will realize that Trump's base must be catered to, that they cannot ignore Trumpism. Now on to the lovely topic of the death penalty. America witnessed a horrible tragedy last week, a really devastating loss that I don't know if we'll ever recover over. Brandon Bernard, a future rocket scientist and murderer of 2 youth pastors, was executed last week. This case brought tremendous anguish to celebrities like Kim Kardashian, who all demanded that this man be granted clemency. Why did he deserve clemency? Well, he didn't actually do the killing. He just set these Christian youth pastors on fire. And Mr. Bernard had turned his life around. He was a good man now. He didn't do nothing. He's setting a positive example for his community and his children. And look at these great photos of him. Look at him smile and his glasses on and everything. How could this man be a danger to our society? He's learned his errors and he is ready to make amends. Why punish him with execution? We see this wailing and gnashing of teeth and this same story play out anytime they want to execute any black man in America, no matter what their crimes are. We need to look at what Brandon Bernard did and assess, did this man really deserve the death penalty? The answer is yes, if you look at what he did. He and his associate, Christopher Villalba, who were both going to cure cancer if they hadn't taken up a life of crime, kidnapped a young evangelical couple, they're two youth pastors, Todd and Stacy Bagley, in 1999 in Texas. The two, drove them around. They stuffed them in the trunk. They drove them around. The two youth pastors begged for their lives. Villalba executed them with his gun, and then Brandon Bernard set them on fire. The man, Todd Bagley, died due to the gunshot wound. Stacy Bagley died due to the smoke inhalation. So Brandon Bernard did actually kill people, despite what his supporters say. His supporters also embraced some very curious arguments, and I had many people tweet this at me when I was talking about this topic last week, is that they're like, he burned them after they were dead. Like, oh, well, now that's okay. You just went along with the crime. He had the lighter fluid with him. He let his friend murder him. Didn't show any care about it. Didn't show any remorse or tell him, hey, this isn't a good idea. Watched it all happen, then set him on fire, and one of them was still alive when he did that. But it's all good, it's all good. He was a good, upstanding man who made a mistake at 18. We all make mistakes at 18, like we stay out late, maybe we got a little too drunk at a party, maybe we, broke our hand doing something stupid, or some of us, kidnap a youth pastor couple and set them on fire and murder them. Just a normal, average kid, teenage mistake that happens. And we see these arguments go on and on when it comes to death penalty. None of these people show the same concern when we're bombing some far off place, but when there's some horrible black murderer who's about to be put to death, rightfully so, they always find these stupid arguments, either that he was a young child at 20, he didn't know what he was doing, or their favorite that his IQ is too low, they can't kill him. There's currently a case going on right now where these death penalty opponents are saying, oh, this guy, he has a 75 IQ. He's too stupid to murder. And yet these people clearly knew what was happening. There was a case a few years back where a guy ordered his victims to, dig up their own grave, and then he executed them. And they were saying this guy was too stupid. Like he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. But it clearly the crime showed that he knew what he was doing and he didn't care. And I never understood that point, that saying that like somebody is too stupid to die by the death penalty. It's like, I don't know really how a crime is less severe by a person having a 90 IQ versus a 75 IQ, but they will find any reason to make sure these people survive. In the 2000s, the man who founded the Crips was a huge cause celebre for liberals to say we shouldn't kill him. He's made such a positive impact on us, on society. He's writing children's books about how you shouldn't go into a life of crime. And then all of his crimes, he didn't admit he did. He didn't show any remorse for them. And all of his crimes were brutal, like home invasions where the victim begged for their life and he murdered them. But everyone said that the Crips founder of one of the worst gangs in American history and really in human history should be spared the death penalty because he's writing some children's books telling kids not to go into crime. So they'll always use these arguments for whatever reason. At any time you see this, they'll use it sometimes for white people on death row, but they don't. It's really particularly blacks that they use it, and women. When Christopher Villalba, who was Brandon Bernard's associate, was executed a few months ago, they were saying this is the first black inmate to be executed. All the headlines, this is awful. And it's like, this guy pulled the trigger. He's a total scumbag. Like, who cares? He didn't listen to the pleas of his victims. Why should this society listen to his pleas? And that's what you have to assess it. But people have such a queasiness about the death penalty. We really don't like the idea of the state having this power to just, strap someone down and stick a syringe into them and then they die. For whatever reason, this is harder for our society to ingest than bombing some village of innocent people celebrating a wedding. And they're like, whoops, the drone strike, mishap. Oh, well, there's people don't get that upset. But when like some heartless killer of 2 youth pastors is set to receive the lethal injection, apparently this is the worst travesty we can imagine. This is barbaric. It's medieval even. There's a general sentiment in our society that we really shouldn't punish any crime, even the worst murderers. And a lot of these arguments they were saying for this Brandon Bernard was almost saying we should let him out of jail. Not just that we should commute a sentence, that we need to let him out. He didn't kill anybody. He's a good boy at age 40. We need to let him go. He was a little kid when he did his crime. It's time to forgive him. And they'll say this for any crime if it's committed by a non-white person. Now, if this crime was committed by a white person, no one would show any sympathy for him. Or let's say this person wrote some mean hate speech on the internet. They want those people arrested, but they don't want hardened criminals arrested. And in our society, we are becoming more and more accepting of crime and saying that these are just the costs of living in a multiracial, multicultural America. And if you see a black guy breaking into a car, then, well, you just need to look the other way because calling the cops would be racist. And it would have a greater detrimental effect on that black criminal than it would on society in general, that we allow, people to maraud and break into our cars and steal stuff without any consequences. We are light on crime unless the crime is that of hate speech or a hate crime, such as burning a Black Lives Matter poster in Washington, D.C., which is now, Washington, D.C. is having a little bit of a crime problem, but all the resources of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department is directed towards finding out which Proud Boys burned some Black Lives Matter insignia during the protests last weekend. If those had been Black Lives Matter or Antifa people destroying property, of course we would have seen the reaction is that they should be let go, that there shouldn't be any charges against them. And there was an Antifa guy who stabbed 4 Proud Boys and charges were dropped against him. Meanwhile, all the police department's energy is directed against these Proud Boys. It's anarcho-tyranny, and it's the society we live in. Normal crime is forgiven and ignored, while political crimes such as saying that we should, any mean comments on the internet or aggressive demonstrations from Trump supporters or anyone for the right wing deserves the full brunt of state power and state crackdown. There is far greater sympathy for a man who murdered 2 youth pastors than there is for a guy who wrote White Lives Matter on a statue. And that's the fact of the matter. I mean, the media is going to claim the latter person is an evil monster. Meanwhile, the former is just an innocent kid who made a big mistake. One of the more hilarious claims that Brandon Bernard's defenders brought up is the fact that there's such a discrepancy in our judicial system that Dylan Roof was able to get Burger King while he was arrested, and he has not been executed yet. Meanwhile, Brandon Bernard apparently did not get Burger King when he was arrested, and he was executed this year, which the real difference is Dylan Roof was sentenced to death row in 2017. Brandon Bernard was sentenced to death row in 2020. That's why he was executed quicker. I don't know if blacks want the constitutional right to have Burger King or McDonald's before they get arrested, but apparently Brandon Bernard's supporters believe that's so, and that it's outrageous that the police arrest whites rather than execute them when they approach for arrest. But this is the standard they want, and it's fairly ridiculous. But pretty much all of the arguments in favor of Brandon Bernard were fundamentally unserious and driven totally by the emotion and the sentiment that the state must not murder any black people, no matter their crimes. They shouldn't even really punish them, and they deserve more lenient sentences than white people, and white people are more evil, and when they kill people, they actually maybe deserve a life sentence or even death row. But blacks never deserve that. They all made mistakes and they're just children at age 26 or whatever. So if it's not clear, I support the death penalty. The state needs that power and to function. The death penalty is necessary for certain crimes. It's not necessarily a deterrent effect. It's a way of achieving justice. That some crimes are so terrible and so heinous that the only proper justice is to kill that person. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's something fundamentally wrong in a society that is queasy and weak-kneed about murdering murderers and other terrible people. There are many criminals that's what they deserve, and that's what happens. And Brandon Bernard, justice was served against him. Justice was served against Christopher Fialva. They deserved what came to them. The only problem is that they had to wait for 20 years for justice to be served. And they had lethal injection. Really, we should bring back firing squad, and these death sentences should be carried out within 5 years. I think it's ridiculous that it takes 20 years for this to occur, and it drains all the resources from the legal system through their appeals and celebrity endorsements and powerful figures trying to stop what is necessary. So justice was served. And I want to close on this quote on the necessity of the death penalty. And it comes from the famous French reactionary writer Joseph de Maistre. He was a strong opponent of the French Revolution and believed in the restoration of the monarchy. Many good writings he has. I strongly recommend reading him if you get the chance. Written in maybe a language that is very different from our era, but I highly recommend it. He has a lot of good things to say, particularly on the death penalty, as I'm going to read from this quote. Here's what he said about why it's necessary for society. Quote, "All grandeur, all power, and all subordination to authority rests on the executioner. He is the horror and the bond of a human association. Remove this incomprehensible agent from the world, and at that very moment, order gives way to chaos, thrones topple, and society disappears." I couldn't say it better myself, and that's the concluding thought on the death penalty. Now on to patron questions. So we've got one patron question, and as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions on Highly Respected if you sign up for the patron option at Highly Respected's Patreon. This question comes from Ryan. He asks, Scott, what do you think about MasterCard, Visa, and other companies cutting off ties to PornHub? This seems like a good thing, but I am worried that this could be used against the right. What do you think about it? That's an excellent question. There are a lot of problems with this. Now, on the face of it, yes, I support this. This is a good thing. I mean, Pornhub's a terrible company. They should not have payment processors in an ideal world. Unfortunately, we do not live in an ideal world. This is all caused by one New York Times column alleging child abuse. Now, there clearly is child abuse, facilitated and enabled by Pornhub. As I said, it's a terrible company. All these porn businesses should lose their payment processors in an ideal world. The problem is all the arguments that are being used against Pornhub can easily be deployed against the right and right-wing websites and right-wing content. Now you may say, there's a difference between political speech and porn. Well, yeah, there's a difference. There will be people who will defend porn. There is not that many mainstream people who will defend the right's freedom to speak in general. And you could see the same arguments being made. It's like, they'll say that this website, let's say VDare is spreading indecent material. It's harmful. It causes violence. We must put this down. And they will use this precedent of saying, well, Pornhub was engaged in indecent behavior and was allowing horrible material to be featured on their website. So does VDare, because they're saying all these terrible things about immigrants. Why don't you shut them down? Why are you allowing your payment processor to be used? MasterCard, what are you doing about this? And we've already seen this countless times with PayPal and other payment processors cutting off the right. And you could see even a furtherance of this, that they're wanting to shut down their servers with Pornhub and saying that, using this explanation. Now, in general, yes, they should. But the problem is are they going to use this same precedent to go after the right? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes. And I think a lot of conservatives need to be careful about celebrating this. On the face of it, yes, it's a good thing. We should not be tolerating Pornhub in an ideal society. At the same time, people like Josh Hawley are cheering this on. it's undermining their arguments for defending freedom on the internet. And that's the unfortunate fact of the matter, is that at the same time that these arguments against porn are used, they're going to be easily deployed against the right, and they're much more willing to use them against the right than they are against porn. I mean, Cato Institute and Reason Magazine and some other liberals will, of course, defend PornHub till the day they die. They love sex workers. These people do not, appreciate the right's freedom of speech. You're not going to see New York Times columns or Washington Post columns about how we need to not deplatform VDare or American Renaissance, but you will see that for PornHub. For strategic purposes, we always have to be on the side of free expression and against censorship, because we are the primary victims of speech suppression. When they want to come after our constitutional rights, we're at the top of the list. Pornographers, unfortunately, are not. If they were, we could change our opinion slightly. We could say, good, this is great that we're going after them. But unfortunately, the system sees us as a far greater threat and a far greater danger than pornographers or even cartels or others who use the internet for nefarious purposes. So anytime that these occur, we're going to eventually suffer for that. So I would say that we always have to maintain pro-free speech. And when these events occur, we don't want PornHub on the internet. We don't want these things to be promoted in our society. At the same time, we have to realize that the system will use these same tactics against us. And at times, we will be cheering on for our own censorship and our own deplatforming when we celebrate these events occurring. So that's just something to keep in mind. Of course, we can rail against porn and say that in our ideal society we would ban it, and demanding that people, of course, stop watching porn. But it is something to keep in mind when these censorship initiatives occur against pornography websites and others, that this sets a precedent for them going after us, which they already are going after us, but they would like to take it further. So that's my answer on that. And with that, that's all the time we have today. There might be a Christmas episode next week. We'll have to see whether there are news topics going on or what occurs. So there may be an episode, there may not. If there's no episode, I will try to make it up with 2 episodes with the following week or the week after that. So with that, until next time, stay respected.